Introduction. Chance favors the prepared mind. Now, this is something that I picked up from a French microbiologist of the 19th century. He is the one who came up with the vaccine, like the way that we were faced with a pandemic a couple of years back. But then the beauty of it is that he relied on his processes because he failed several times. And after several failures, but still he relied on his processes, the process that he put in place, and ultimately he succeeded. So the gist of this, what I thought was that this is more apt in today's SME businesses, because when we fail doesn't mean that we should go back to the way that we did. We need to have reliance and dependency and trust in your processes. Process ultimately will gain. It's just that you might have a temporary setback, but ultimately you will gain in the long run. Now, before we go into this perspective, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to run through the presentation and leave about 7 to 8 minutes of the time for Q&A, because I always believe in interactive session that will help us, unearth some questions which we may not be aware of. Because I am also a student and not an expert of turnaround. Although Hamza introduced me as consultant, but I go beyond being a consultant of implementation. So we'll go through that in this slide. Now the summary of this, what we can gather here is that it looks that SME businesses contribute massively, right? But then there are challenges involved, because you will see that 3/4 of the SME businesses are failing, right? Or in Arshad's terminology, they are sick. Okay? So what's the reason? There can be macro as well as micro. Macro we know, right? I think someone over here mentioned about diversity, equality and inclusivity. And that is more prominent now, right? And on top of that, the brain drain and so many other challenges from a macro level. Then of course the geopolitical volatility that we are facing, right? That how will that impact your pricing? How will that impact your supply chain? Like this gentleman is doing in going into freight. So what will that have an impact in your business? Those are some of the things that we need to be mindful. So from a micro perspective, I summarize this into 4 core areas, right? One is the working capital challenges that you are faced with, which is familiar, I'm sure. 9.5 out of 10 of SME businesses here are facing these challenges, particularly on working capital, right? Then you have the challenge of sustainable profits. We are faced with these challenges, right? Then thirdly, we are more focused on digitization of the functions and not the digitalization of the processes, which this gentleman is more familiar, right? And lastly, it's about the future. We always look at how do we run for the day. You can't survive that. You have to think way ahead. Now, Amina was talking about the Norfolk success story of 30 years, 3 decades. That itself is an achievement. That means they have stood the test of challenges, and being resilient and being vital to the industry is something that needs to be cherished. So all of us, there are startup guys, all are involved in this. So we need to learn from the mistakes others have made and be smart in not repeating the errors. Now I like to put all these 4 together and share one of my experiences. Now this is a company, a medium-sized business that has been in the industry for about 2-3 decades, and in the fashion industry. So I'm sure you know how dynamic and volatile the industry is, right? So this company has been doing okay for some time, and in the last 10 years they went a little bit wonky. What I meant by that is they started to borrow. Now working capital challenges are there, but that doesn't mean that you go and borrow from bank or financial institutions and fund them. That's a deadly situation. Because what if, because you are in the fashion industry, What if the demand collapses? How are you going to repay? So, and that also, if you're not mindful of your debt that you're building up, then it's a ticking time bomb. And you, more often than not, you will fail. Because this particular company, they had good management systems. Of course, they were focused on digitizing the functions, but not the process. So, in other words, we needed an integrated system so that it gives everything together rather than doing bits and pieces of manual stuff, right? So, this particular company had early warning signs flashing in their financials. You can see it, right? So, if you don't take actions promptly, what it means is that you are creating a volcano to erupt. So that's why it's important that you take spot actions. We are living in a VUCA world or volatile world, right? So if you don't take actions then and there or rectify it before it is too late, then it's lost. It's a lost cause. And this particular company racked up the debt so much so that it was 10 times the size of their annual turnover. So you can just picture and see where they are. They are firefighting internally just to service the debt, not even to repay the capital. So that's the sales of it. Now, what are the lessons that we can learn from this? Is that you need to be forecasting all the time. Keep rolling in your eyes and ears. It should run through your blood. Effectively, you should sleep, you should eat, you should work through the need for being proactive, right? So that is a failure on their side, which has ended up on this situation. Of course, there are other reasons involved. Taking debt is the easiest thing because it invariably allows you to move on or fix the problem without going to the root cause of it. So that is another challenging reason that they have failed. Of course, they were looking at new fashion, new design, but little did they give prominence to the risk mitigations. So these three are the learnings that we can take forward. But when you do something, it's always better to be cautiously optimistic. Don't be over-optimistic. I mean, we have that feeling that, okay, when we do a startup or business, that we always think that hunky-dory stories, right? Over-optimism. And that is actually infectious. If you are over-optimistic, then that's a problem. So that's why and then you go and spend your working capital on that and ended up having a plate on your rear. So it's important to understand the challenges and then work accordingly to avoid it. So the key to survive is to be resilient and increase your vitality. So for me, it's the 3A principles: being adept, adaptable, and also agile. So meaning you have to be flexible, you have to be predictable, consistent in what you are doing. Then of course, if you do that, then you can overcome the challenges because every day is a new challenge that we are faced with. Now see, with the weather conditions, for example, we never expected this type of weather patterns. It always has seasonality. Now all that is gone out of the window. That's because of the mankind getting involved in it, right? So we need a new playbook for the SME businesses. Now these are some of the basic, not necessarily the solutions to all your problems. Each one's solution is unique by itself, right? So when you are in the survival mode, it's nothing but cash. Forget about anything else. You can't make 40%, 50% profits. If you have to cut it down to 10 or 20%, and if that gives you cash, go ahead, because you want to survive. And what's the bloodline of survival? It's about generating cash, being cash positive, or at least cash neutral. Then when you get into a stabilization phase, that's the time that you build up your base and strengthen your arms and legs. That's very important because at the end of the day you are going to put up flows later on. So there are things that you need to be mindful of: risks elements, in forecasting, your system, internal information systems has to be prompt and also detailed as much as possible. That gives you the chance to make quick decisions because you can't dilly-dally and deliberate on decisions. You have to make spot decisions at times. Then, of course, when you succeed, there are three important things to remember. During COVID, a lot of people were caught napping because most of them didn't have cash. They didn't even have cash to pay the salaries. So those handful of people were able to pay salaries for at least about 3 to 4 months until you come out of the situation. That's because they were prudent. So likewise, when you are in good times, always set aside about 5-10% of your cash flow into a sinking fund so that you can recall that during a rainy day. Then another important thing is that future growth is important for your sustainable profits. Now that's another reason why you don't generate is because you don't focus on the products. You think what you have is super, but the market is so dynamic. It changes. What happened to Kodak? That's a good story, right? Alex ice cream, for example. Where were they in the 60s? They were on the top, and now I understand that they are coming back into business. So these are some of the case studies, examples that we can lean on to learn. And then thirdly, you need to be mindful of the debt you take. That's the easiest to do. Ideally, if you keep it at debt is good to a certain extent, but beyond that, you're asking for trouble. So that's why it's important that you retain it around 25 to 40%. And you have to keep monitoring. Remember I told you about the company, they didn't monitor it for about 3 years. You see, you don't become bankrupt overnight. It takes about 3 to 4 years for you to really go downhill and crash. So that's why it's important that you look at these flash signs that is throwing out. So make sure that your debt ceiling is 40%. Beyond that, it's dangerous. We have seen some groups collapsing like a heap of cards. That's because they thought they can always rely on debt to finance their ventures and acquisitions. So that's a deadly thing to do. Of course, this is what happens when you have a structured process. It will always give you an advantage. Why? Because you are prudent. You know where to press the buttons. You know where to save money. Because money, ultimately, you have to save cash for your future growth. You have to, as much as possible, finance through equity needs. So your savings in your kitty comes in handy, right? Or find JDs or alliances that will help you to take you to the next growth. So those who have gone outside offshores will say how important is to have a JD or alliances of sort, right? So these are some of the solutions that I provide. Of course, working capital management, then debt restructure, helping the process, improving the processes, efficiency improvements of your asset usage, the risk mitigations, and of course, evaluating new projects, new opportunities, right? Of course, when I do this, I do it with on an implementation success basis. So that's what I'm a bit more than a consultant where I take hands-on and implement it. So that's the toughest part. That's what I'm sure it's a win-win situation for both parties. That's something that I look at. And then also the ability to dissect the financial and the business aspects of any company, any industry, and come up with practical solutions. That's because I do a deep dive in whatever I do, and then come up with identifying really where the core of the problem is. I leave you with these golden rules, which I call it the 5 C's. Always remember, regardless of any level of business that you are in, be consistent. As I mentioned, always be cash focused and reduce complexity. Just stick to the basics. Don't do anything ad hoc or something more complicated. Then also commit to value creation. Whatever you do, whether you are relocating your business, whether you are investing somewhere, always see the net value that you are going to get. Not only for you, but for your stakeholders, even your customers. That's very important. Then minimize your risks by complying with your rules, regulations, and also the governance. That's an important thing. And then be consistent and predictable. When you go to a bank and ask for a loan, they ask you what's your future projections. So when you give provide figures, then obviously their reliance on your on the debt is lesser. So that's why it's important that you make sure that you do a proper forecast. Then look at different scenarios because environment is so challenging, right? And come up with something that is helpful. So that's about it. And I'll open the floor for Q&A. Feel free to ask any questions that you may feel you have, you might want to clarify. So that's the reason why I cut it short, so that gives an opportunity for me to understand what questions that you have. And you can, of course, the QR code is there. You can always, get into it and see what I have to offer.
Yeah, one question.
Yes.
You say 30% of what? 30% not to exceed 30% of what?
Overall, you are talking of the capital, right?
Yes.
Is it revenue
The
or
loan should not exceed 30%
of overall investment? Yeah, so 25% is the ideal one. So if it is 25% debt, 75% should be your equity, right? Maximum ceiling is 40% of the total investments, not of the revenue.
We are talking about debt, and now you are talking about working capital. What
Yeah.
about capital expenditure debt?
Say again, please.
Capital expenditure debt versus working
Capital expenditure, if you are taking a debt for capital expenditure, then it has to be a long-term loan to finance long-term assets. Because now another example is there was a company running farms, agriculture farms, right? They had taken a short-term loan to finance long-term investments. And that's deadly. And that company went bust. And now they're struggling to even pay those debts. So he had to ultimately shell out part of his investments. So if you're taking a long-term investments, long-term debt is fine, provided you're clear of your returns that you're expecting from that. And the asset usage is about, at least about 65%, then it makes sense to take a debt because then you can service the debt as well as repay the capital. Any other questions? Feel free, because this is the platform that you are given to. Yes, sir.
I would like to thank Raufir and actually I totally confirm what he has to say here because he turned around my company. So I have one is very blunt, very to your face. It's hard to digest, but it's actually little brief. He was selling close to 25,000 bikes a month. He said, "What are you doing?" It's down to 5,000, but I'm talking about it. So thanks, Raufir.
Yes, ma'am.
What's your advice for people, example, who would like to expand or maybe don't have the means to, and the advice that we might give someone in giving up some of the shares of their company, because that's a difficult decision to make, right? What advice would you give?
I would look at basically you're looking at the value. Why are you giving up shares, right? And where is that going to get investment? So you need to weigh the pros and cons of what advantage does it give you by relinquishing the shares. If you are doing it because to settle a debt, then that's a different situation. So you have to look at the purpose why you are trying to sell the shares. Is it something to expand? Is it something to settle a debt? So there has to be a purpose-driven need why you are disposing the shares. So that has to be analyzed, and accordingly then you take the next step. If it is, for example, let's say you're selling it because you want to go overseas to invest, then that overseas investment should give you a value greater than what you are holding in terms of shares. So, and then if you have plans to go into the stock market, so therefore you're disposing to settle some personal debt or company debt, that's another scenario already. So you need to look at why you're wanting to sell the shares. So that has to be really looked at.
Yes. That same note, isn't it a safer bet who want to giving out shares than coming and borrowing in bank, which is going to get unless you have the proper cash flow and you can service the debt and you can closed at the right time.
Yeah.
So right now, what Sri Lankan companies face is, without forecasting or budgeting, just think this is the solution and they go and borrow. So don't you think putting on shares or getting extra equity from outside will help you to overcome that situation on the longer term and on the safer side?
True. It depends on where your business is. When your business is struggling, open and put your loss. So if it is stabilized and say it's about to take off, then if not, what they will do is like a startup. If it's a startup, if you are asking for, if you are willing to give only 10%, they'll ask 50% of your shares. So there is no fun in that. So idea is to understand where, in which, at which stage are you in terms of your business. If it is doing very well, then obviously you command premium. But if it is not, then you have to find other alternatives. Probably look at financing their expansion on a profit sharing basis, or you get a JD guy to come and join, things like that. So you need to look at from that angle.
So even let's say you are not in trouble, but you foresee in the next 2-3 years, unless you expand or you pumping more cash, you're going to suffer. So don't you think, I know it's going to be a disadvantage of thinking like something might lose 50%, but don't you think, that's not what I feel, is that isn't it a safer bet that way?
Yeah, it all depends on how your industry is moving. Where in terms of your industry, if it is a mature industry, then there's nothing much. Then you need to look at that diversifying into other businesses, not stick to that business. If you stick to that business, saying that this is my heart and soul, bread and butter, then you will naturally die. So before that, you need to research and see that you have something for the next generation to work on.
Basically, you have to look forward and plan for the future.
True. So that means you have to look at different scenarios. Where are you heading? And then accordingly you look at, and then work out the worst case, the best case, and the most likely scenario, and then see. Then you get clarity. When you do both skin deep, trust me, it gives you clarity. So that's the beauty of going. A lot of people don't like to go deep. So
Sorry that perfect to derail you again.
No problem.
But I think
How much time we have?
1 minute.
1 minute.
No, you see, what you say is correct. You see, when we go in for strategic warehouse, when we are doing our own thing, it's something beneficial to you. I might be promoting you as well. I think getting somebody from outside to have a look at your financials or your performance or your, way you are structured, you have a fresh perspective where you could change or improve or do some changes.
Yeah.
So when we do things, we do the same thing over and over a year, then we might lose focus. So don't you think it's better to get somebody occasionally, even it might sound silly, but get somebody to look at it and give you a shot in the arm to see this is what is happening. It's like doing this one on your picture.
Definitely. I mean, when you are in-house, you don't feel how much you grow horizontally. But when from outside, you can see, okay, these are things that we need to change. So of course, if you have somebody expert for which you are paying, then you need to get a value for money from him rather than hire from somebody from outside. If you don't have, then it's worthwhile to look for some outside perspective. Always when you go to the doctor, you get a second opinion. You don't rely on him to do a surgery. That's deadly. So always get a second opinion, then he gives you a good perspective. And your decision becomes clear. Okay, thank you very much.